Welcome to Campfire Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan Tinetti, pastor of Trinity Lutheran Church here in Arcadia, and I am joined virtually, as always, by the executive director of Camp Arcadia, Chip May. How's it going, Chip?
It's a pleasure to be here.
And with us today, we have two of our great friends, Art Just, a missionary to Latin America and professor at Concordia Theological Seminary in Fort Wayne, and also Scott Bruzek, pastor of St. John Lutheran Church in Wheaton, Illinois. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's so good to have you with us. We're continuing our series through COVID-19, and today we're going to talk about some things that are timely to our current season that we're in, but I think also a topic that transcends that as well, which is liturgical spirituality. What does it look like to have a faith that is formed and informed by the rhythms of the church, the practices and spiritual disciplines of the church? And before we get into that, though, I just wanted to ask you guys, what has pastoral care looked like in this season when you're not able to gather, when you're not able to be with your people the way you normally would? What does that look like in your respective situations? And Art, maybe you would start.
Sure. We have over 100 people, families and the like, in the mission field in Spanish-speaking world. And we did bring a few back who were challenged physically, their health-wise, or they were in a situation where there are no ventilators, for example. So if they got the virus, they would be in trouble. But many of them are in place, and we thought that was important as a sign to our partner churches that we're not abandoning them in a time like this. And I was really pleased to see how many decided to stay in place. One of the things that I do in my role is to spend time with each of them, listen to them, do a little counseling, and then I would have a, kind of what, you would have if you went to a hospital room, a invocation, scripture reading. I would comment on it. I used Easter Tuesday, Jesus, coming into the with the 11 in Luke 24 and saying peace to this house, and it was perfect, and talking about a little bit, and I think they all could resonate with this, that we're in the Easter season, but we're surrounded by death. I told you guys earlier, I watched the CBS Evening News, and breaking news, 40,000, breaking news. I mean, it's death is all around us.
Right.
And that's kind of how the disciples felt in the upper room. I mean, all they knew is death, and then Jesus comes and says peace. I mean, and then what I did, which was interesting, is I did a book years ago called Visitation, which was a series of devotions and prayers on particular circumstances. And I love the sound of collects, and that's what I've been doing. I've just been reading collects a lot. And I picked collects from anxiety, apprehension, and fear, and I read those. And then I took some collects from loneliness. So I think that's a big issue for many people, especially when you're in the mission field. And then because the theme that I was using was peace, I have a section called Baptismal Identity Peace, and I would pray those collects too. And then there's one at the end that I could just move right into a prayer for the family and for their situation and for the church that was there, and then the Lord's Prayer and a blessing. And it was the best hour of my day. And I did about 8 or 10 of these. It was great, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The people were very open and honest. Sometimes their kids would be there, and I know all these kids, and we'd talk, and I'd have a chance to share with them, and they'd share back with me what they're doing. And one of my first lines was always, "You guys still love one another?" They're all cramped in the place. But I did ask them a little bit about how they're managing. The guys are always doing services, but I think it's increasing people's devotion and prayer life. I really do. And these are all good pastors. They know what they're doing, and it's really very encouraging to see how well they're doing. We've had incredible communication across the mission lines, both in our region and internationally, and we've had some really kind of critical situations. One of them is your good friend John Nordley. We had to pull him out of Nigeria, and we had to rent 2 armored cars with guys with guns, take them across Nigeria to the airport. And they called it Operation Barracuda. It was great.
That's
And I could
actually
just
how
see
I
that
go to the grocery store,
You
actually.
know, it was like right out of Homeland, you know.
Wow.
But anyway, he's home and he's happy, you know.
Good.
But anyway, it's been a real challenge in many ways. But and one of the things we're worried about now in the mission field is, you know, some of these countries do not have a great infrastructure. People are starting to go hungry.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be civil unrest.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, you know, the curfews, you know, being in place, not having the medical care, but people may actually begin breaking into houses and that kind of thing. So we're monitoring that as well. There are a lot of concerns, but we have a great team and we're learning as we're going, but it's been quite an experience. And I would say the number one issue is pastoral care. You know, it really is. And there's been a lot of our missionaries are Skyping with their partner churches and the people that are, you know, in their world. So it's been quite an education. I've spent a lot of time in meetings as well as teaching classes. So it's been a full plate for me.
Yeah, for sure.
That sounds great, Arthur. Ryan, who's of course is my pastor, will just send me a text with like a prayer emoji. So I feel like I might not be getting the full treatment here. So
Kip, you know, I don't know how to use emojis. So.
That's true. You have a flip phone, so yes.
You know, I bet we could kind of, you know, grandfather in Camp Arcadia as a Spanish-speaking area, and we
That's right.
We could put you on our list there, Chip. Yeah.
Scott, how about for you? What's pastoral care looked like for you in the Chicago area?
We spent an awful lot of time together, so it's been difficult to have everybody separated. The first week or two was very interesting, and I'm curious about you as a pastor, but I found myself to be quite exhausted after the first couple of weeks. Then I spoke to some other pastors, and I realized that the amount of anxiety and loneliness that was being directed toward them in texts and calls and emails had shot way up. Was that true for you as well? Did you have people making much more contact with you?
Yeah, to a certain extent, of people reaching out and saying, "Hey, Pastor, can we just pray together?" Interestingly, not who the people I would have expected, which is like our homebound and shut-ins. And it should have occurred to me off the bat, but I've come to realize they're kind of the most resilient to this. They're like, well, this is business as usual, more or less. It's those folks who have not expected it. So no, Chip's calling me every hour on the hour, curled up in a fetal position, and but we're getting through it so far.
That we would have expected, but everybody else, I was just curious about.
Right.
So, and we're a little bit strange because we have the Holy Supper every day, so people have this rhythm of gathering together every day, and there's a lot of face-to-face contact. So that's all gone and missed desperately. We put together 10 or 12 folks who are calling through the congregation every week. We have a fairly large number of people to get to, 600 or 700 people that we want to get to every week. And, you know, it's all on a spreadsheet and it comes to me every day. And then the pastors are each recording their contact with people as well and trading that back and forth and identifying people who need a little bit extra care, might need money or might need food. So far, things have gone pretty well. I've noticed perhaps what Chip has noticed, which everybody becomes more of themselves at this point, right? So people who are lonely or anxious are more lonely and more anxious. People who have seen this before have sort of carried on. The interesting thing for me are people my age and younger who in some ways have not been tested so severely. It's interesting. My son just happened to be watching Ken Burns' documentary on the Vietnam War during this time, which I was grateful for because that puts things in context, right?
Sure.
I mean, this whole thing about we are, of course, being asked to do some things that are irregular for us. But to be honest with you, so far, most people are warm and safe and dry. They can go to the grocery store. They can go out. If they need to go for a drive, if they need to see friends, they can walk at a distance. So we should be able to weather this if we keep the rhythm of our normal lives.
Well, you use a word there, rhythm that I've heard a lot from you in your teaching, and I've also observed it in your writings as well, referring to rhythm. What do you mean by that, and why is that such an important concept for you?
For Christians, today should look like yesterday, and it should look like tomorrow. So it's been interesting. I've noticed, or I've begun to make in my own mind this distinction between apocalyptic thinking and eschatological thinking.
Okay.
So I know apocalyptic is a biblical word, but in America it really means kind of a survivalist mentality and the great individualism of that. That has manifested itself in how the things that have happened here have been politicized, how people have been threatening toward each other, how people have been hoarding, those kinds of things. On the other side of that is eschatology, where I know how the story ends. And so I live my life back to front. And this life then has a normal rhythm. If Jesus were to appear right now, or if somebody said, Jesus will be here tomorrow, the world will end, today would go about its business without a hitch, right? And that's because people have this rhythm. So I think at least you can define the rhythm in general as orbiting Christ. But if you look in Acts 2, for example, you can see very easily toward the end of that chapter that people are given to Christ's scripture, prayer, the divine service, liturgy, and Eucharist, by tithing, and I'll always say a real 10%, and then more percentage points for the poor. And you can remember how in the early church, even in that text, people are astounded that they're kind to others outside their community. And so then that's a thorough mercy that gives a great witness to Christ. So that's the rhythm, right? Christ, scripture, prayer, liturgy and Eucharist, tithing and alms, and a thorough mercy and a winsome witness. So nothing changes, right? Because we live eschatologically. We live from our baptism. We live back from the end of time. So we should just sort of carry on.
So Scott, in a time when you can't worship together, then, take us through the decisions you've made at your congregation as far as to how to help maintain those rhythms when you can't do a worship.
Right. So again, I would say this is nothing new. My colleague, Marcus Nelson, who's a very fine pastor, observed me early in this. He said it this way: when the Israelites were in Babylon, they didn't build a new temple, right? They opened the window and prayed toward Jerusalem. So there are some things that we just may not be able to do right now. But if we have stored up resources, then we won't collapse. I mean, I wrote a letter to my congregation last week that said, this is just the story of fat cows and skinny cows, right? Remember the story, fat cows, skinny cows, right? The skinny cows, what does this mean? They come out and eat the fat cows, they get better. What does this mean? Joseph says, it means that you're, in good times, you get ready for bad times, right? Israel does that and everything works out. So the rhythm of life gets you ready for bad times. So of course there are some things we can't do. We haven't been to the Eucharist in 7 weeks. It's extraordinarily difficult. I've only done one baptism, even though I had several people in the catechumenate and some who were looking forward to baptism at Easter Vigil. Why do we do what we do? The overriding question is how we love our neighbor as ourselves. So everything is done out of love for neighbor. And then you kind of think about, now what would my next step be and how would we do that? So for example, we haven't celebrated the Eucharist. I think it's a very difficult conversation because you don't want to give offense or take offense, especially in a time like this. for my own, or with our own decisions, the more we learned about this, the more we've learned that it's spread by touch and by breath. And these are two primary pastoral ways of engaging people. So, for example, you might have seen this morning that as the Germans reopen their churches, there's talk of banning congregational singing because that puts a cloud into the air, they say, as much as coughing. So in terms of the Eucharist, I spent a couple of days trying to figure out if there was a way that I could get the Eucharist to people, given contamination comes by breath and by touch, and then assuming that I, for example, was an asymptomatic carrier. So let's think in terms of that. That's kind of worst case, right? Your pastor is asymptomatic carrier. It doesn't seem to me that there's any way that I can then deliver the Eucharist to somebody without being a danger to them. So until I know more, we've just refrained from doing that. Although I have some ideas about that, and we did change our final celebrations of the Holy Supper just a bit. But that's where we are right now. I don't know if more detail, Chip, or not, or well, how, or if that can all the way you go.
I've noticed you haven't done like online church in the sense of sort of which you've taken recordings of previous services of the liturgy and the music, and then kind of spliced in contemporary readings and sermons, right? That's what you.
Yeah, good. So that one was just a little bit easier. So a couple of reasons for that. Hey, we're not much to look at, number one, right?
More or less the same thing.
So, and it's not what we do all the time. And so we, of course, thought to ourselves, what's the best we can do in terms of delivering good stuff? Congregational singing music is a great big deal for us. So, and also for me, there's almost nothing more depressing than looking at an empty church, especially when somebody is celebrating. Okay, so this is, for example, imagine yourself on vacation. Sometimes you walk by churches where a priest might be celebrating, but there's nobody there. That's a very strange and I find somewhat depressing phenomenon. So what we were trying to do is keep things as accessible. So we went podcasts rather than live stream. You can get it anytime. And as normal, here's a recording of our Eucharist. So for on Easter, you can have all the great music we normally have, and to try to console people in that way. But that's, of course, a decision of, that can be made in all different ways.
Right.
People do other things. But for us, it seemed like the best way.
It seems like the route that you've gone is a way to try and retain a sense of the communion of saints in this time when we're separated. Arthur, I wonder if you have any other thoughts of how we can continue to cultivate a sense of being the body of Christ, being united and connected with one another, even at a time when we're not able to physically, be with each other. How can we still have and retain a sense of being connected as the church?
It's such a great question. And I just want to affirm, some of Scott's decisions. He and I talked early on, and I was, surprisingly anxious that I was not receiving the sacrament. And there are people here who are doing the little tables, and I thought about joining that, but I kind of looked at this as a famine. I'm in a famine. That's your fat cows, skinny cows. And the other thing that struck me is I love Marcus's, illustration, but, one of the things I've done in Spain since 2012 is I visit these little pockets of people all over the country. And oftentimes I was the only person who visited them for a long time. And it would be 3 or 4 months. And they would get the Eucharist only 3 or 4 months. And I said, I can do that. I mean, if they live that, and I mean, I think I can do that for a while. I hope it's not 3 or 4 months, but I can hunker down for that long. And I mean, that was always a real, it was a sadness they couldn't get it more, but the joy when I would come. I mean, I was, it was apostolic. They greeted me like one of the 12, you know, and I mean, and they laid out everything. I mean, it was really a very, but I you know, I just thought that's how, and both Linda and I had the same kind of sense of that. Our church has been broadcasting the services, and we're watching them, and I am surprised how salutary that is. I didn't expect it, you know, and we have our little bulletin, we watch, and we see the numbers, and I find it's really, we do communicate with some of the people in our congregation, and we love knowing that we're participating in this service as they are, you know, at 8:30 every Sunday, and there is a sense of community there. It's an amazing thing. I really resonate with that. Our pastor, and I'm sure Scott's doing the same, has been very sort of intentional about giving people a way of having a daily kind of rhythm to their life in terms of scripture and prayer, psalm. I find that I'm rediscovering the Psalms, and I'm using your prayer book, Scott, that you gave me many years ago, and thoroughly enjoying that. And the Psalms to me are the right thing at this time. They are exactly right. And I'm always amazed how, you know, and I'm just reading through them just regularly. I'm not picking anyone, I'm just reading. And how oftentimes what I'm reading at that moment is just so exactly where I'm at and what I feel people are at. And I want to go around and say, hey, I want to share this with everybody. You guys got to be reading what I'm reading right now.
Right.
You know, I one of the great blessings for me, I'm just speaking personally here, is I'm teaching Hebrews right now. And we're working through the text three times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And I am reading every word that Kleinig wrote. I am just working through Kleinig. And it's hard going, man. I mean, that is a rough read, but I can't tell you that, I mean, if everybody could be doing what I'm doing, they would find this to be a most, we're in chapter 10 right now. I mean, we're just like, and I have 27 guys. So, I mean, we're translating it through and they're asking questions, and we're just sort of like, just immersed in this, you know. And I mean, and I have other classes too. I'm doing Luke and Greek reading, stuff like that. Lord's Supper, we have a class. So I am fully engaged, and that is very devotional for me, very salutary. And I wish people would find a way to do that, reading not just devotional stuff, but stuff that kind of attaches them in a way to something that is beyond the normal kind of reading that they do, that really does have a deeply Christian spiritual capacity to it. It is hard to maintain community. It is. I can see that. At the seminary too, we're having chapel at 10 o'clock every morning, and that's very salutary as well. I'm always surprised how much that means to me. And I think people are writing in saying how much they are grateful for that. I've had a chance to preach there once, and I'll be preaching at St. Paul's too, you know. But anyway, it's tough. It's tough, but I think people are finding ways, and I think it's going to make us better. I think we're going to be better people. I think it's, and I can't, I mean, I travel so much. I am so happy to be home. I can't tell you. It's great, you know. And this study is my castle right now. Everything flows out of this place. And but anyway, I don't know if there was anything else you were thinking of. Yeah.
Let's go back to the idea about this living life backwards to the the end to now, and sort of knowing how it's going to end. Because I think one of the things that I'm personally experienced is this loss of the future, or at least future plans, you know, and this idea that all the things that we had planned out are now so uncertain. You know, simple things like the baseball season, you know, these sort of rhythms that have guided our lives. Can you maybe talk more about, I'll direct this back to Scott, you know, what are some of the ways that we reorientate our rhythms from the kind of maybe, and they're not bad, but kind of the secular rhythms of of the baseball season or the camp season for me, or even the things that now are not possibly going to happen in the same way that they have in the past. And I'm finding a real sense of loss and mourning and sort of being unmoored from my normal living. So can you talk about what it means that to be kind of grounded in something that is more certain?
It's a very interesting comment, and I've, in some sense, seen that in others and seen it in myself, especially in opportunities that would be missed. However, it's important to take a step back from that, I think. And maybe just a little pastoral care by Zoom, right? Just spend a little time listening to your life right now. Because I think the most orienting things are not the things that you'll miss, not the baseball season, and frankly, not even whether camp opens or not. I think instead you wake up to whatever the day brings you and you say to yourself, how can I live in love for God and love for others? And to love is to do good. So you say to yourself, how can I make space in life as I have it to do good to other people? And whatever might come to you in that day, that's what you do. Right? And for many of us, that's going to look much more solitary. I haven't been out of the house in a couple of days, right? But I still had lots of contact or found other ways or been able to reflect on my own life. So you use different things to order your life. Your prayers in the morning and in the evening, right? You use different relationships to order your life. How it is with your wife and with your children, right? One of the most stunning things for me is when I go for a walk. It's rained here for a couple of days, which is why I haven't been out, but I walk now and I notice entire families walking together, a mom, a dad, and a couple of kids. That is the strangest thing. I never saw that in living here 23 years. Never happened, right? So there's a new thing to think about. There's a new way to order life. And I think in some ways, as Arthur was saying, that's very good for us. We'll come out of this stronger. And I do, I just, without being too sassy, what I hope will happen is that all the people who are with great anticipation and sometimes great anger, saying that they can't get to church or get to the Holy Supper, I want to see them there every week from now until the day they die. and with equal fervor, right?
Right.
And those are the sort of things, right? Because remember Augustine, how do we move through our life? We move through the past with memory, we move through the future with imagination. So hopefully the memory of this will propel us into a future where we adore Christ who comes to the altar to save us. And we never miss that opportunity. And we understand that as what we get to do and not what we've got to do.
Very good.
Very good. A question I have is, you hear, and I'm not disparaging this, but I guess it's been said so much where Christians will say to other Christians, God's got this. Don't worry. God's in charge, and I believe that. I hold on to that, but it also makes me want to punch him in the face. I'm like, I know, I get this, but are you watching the news, people? I mean, New York is a dumpster fire, okay? And I don't know if it seems like holding on to that is sort of a denial of the reality and the suffering that's going on. Maybe I'm hearing that. That's maybe not, of course, what they're intending by it, but what are your guys' thoughts about that? I'll start with Arthur. What are your thoughts about those types of sentiments?
Yeah, I mean, it's a truth, I mean, at the same time, though, I think it it downplays the angst that people have at this time. And there's that, the larger reality of Jesus coming into the house of the 11 and saying, peace be to this house. And yet immediately following that, it says they're troubled and doubts are arising in their hearts. I mean, the fact is, it's very hard to deal with the reality of death, the reality of loneliness, and to know that there is peace. And I think we have to embrace the fact that there are going to be some people who are not going to find that peace, or are not going to be able to deal with the fact that God's got it. I know a lot of people who are just going crazy in this time because they're like my son. He's a people person, and I mean he's just crazy. He needs people, and he's the one who's not out there. I mean, he's watching his kids, and he's part of our little circle. So, that was one of the decisions we made. So he comes over, and I mean, it's like, I just sit there and listen to him for an hour because he's got to talk. And I mean, I feel for some of these people when I go out shopping and the like, and I see how many of them don't have anything to ground them, and they don't have purpose in their lives. And I think, maybe this will help them find that. But it does show you that you do have to have kind of a community. You have to have a reason for why we are alive, what it means to be human, and what is there. I mean, you can see how people who are really grounded in the Christian faith and the Christian life are finding a way to live knowing that God does have it, and I can deal with that even when I have these anxieties and apprehensions. That's why I love those prayers, because I don't know what it is about those great collects, is that they go right to the heart of things, and they speak directly to the issue, and then they spin it in the way in which it has to be spun to show that, yeah, God's got it, I mean, and this is how he has it. So it's a tough time, and I don't have any of those anxieties. I've got a full life, and I've got projects, and I've got things I'm looking forward to, and I got a great, family. And Linda and I, we're just kind of enjoying the time together. It's kind of crazy. There was an article in the New York Times about how older people are kind of loving this up. It's kind of, and I can see that, But I also know that Linda and I are part of that over 65, and Linda's, partially diabetic, so she's vulnerable, and we got to be careful, And I think this is what I've been saying. Anybody who downplays this thing has been wrong. This thing is way more serious and I'm willing to be, fourth commandment. I'm obedient to the governor. And whatever he tells me, I'm going to do. So, yeah.
Scott, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think Arthur did a great job. So here's the simple distinction. One way, God's got this, so I don't need to engage it, or God's got this, so I need to fully engage it.
Right.
And I think Christians are on the side of fully engage it. And then Arthur, again, the great consolation. I've said this to you before, but the best thing I know, and maybe the only thing I know about prayer, is Bernard of Clairvaux. When we pray, God gives us what we ask or something better. And that's true even now. So we engage full blast. How do we love our neighbor? How do we do our best? How do we put the best construction on things? How do we help others who are less fortunate than we are? And then every night we go to bed and pray that the Lord would sort it out, knowing that he'll give us what we ask or something better. And I think that's the way that we can live with pure hearts.
Gentlemen, this has been such a great and enriching conversation for all of us. Last thing we like to ask our guests before we go is, are there any books, you mentioned the Psalms, but are there any other books that you're reading right now, or podcasts that you're listening to, anything that you're especially benefiting from right now that you would recommend to our listeners?
All right, so this is what I got from my old pal, Pete Ladick. He gave me 2,000 years of prayer, Arthur, so even fatter than the one that you wrote.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But I've had great fun reading through prayers of the ancients across.
Is it good? Is it worth getting?
I mean, you get it for like $6 on Amazon. Mine's in pristine condition. Apparently, it wasn't prayed very hard.
I mean, I'm always looking for, the kind of the classic collects. Elizabeth Goudge did a book in which she did a collect for every day that comes out of and I don't know if you know her, she's kind of a classic English author. She's written some wonderful things, good Christian woman. And she did a collect, and they're from all over, and they're just, the language in these collects are just beautiful.
Yeah, so it's interesting, I haven't been reading books about things. I've been reading prayer books like Arthur. It's interesting. Now, I haven't really reflected on that until you said it, but most of my stuff has been either devotional or given to the task that we've got before us. It's interesting.
Yeah, I have to say that the reading I've done has been in association with my work. And one of the things I've been working on is a novel, and it's about novels. So I'm right at the end of it, but I'm rereading many of these novels, and they're all with strong Christian themes, and they're beautifully written. And I mean, if you've never read Brideshead Revisited, I highly recommend it. I'm rereading Old School now by Tobias Wolff.
Nice.
I started the whole time rereading A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. These are some really, and I think that they could be inspiration. And it's hard to recommend books in some ways, but I really have I went into my study, I collected prayer books, and I just brought a bunch of them home, and I've just been using them, and they've been great. Doberstein has been a wonderful guide for me. His prayer book for ministers, it's for clergy, but it's perfect for this time. So.
Well, brothers, thank you for the conversation and the inspiration. It's been a pleasure. God bless you both. Stay well.
Thanks for the invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful.